For the 4th of July, I thought I'd try something a little different in this video. So I'm starting out by writing a 4 in a yellow marker, and then I'm tracing around the outside of that 4 with a black Sharpie flip chart marker. And on the inside, where there's kind of a hole inside the 4, instead of just tracing around it like you may normally do with a triangle, I drew a star. So it's fun when you have letters or numbers that have a kind of a hole in the middle, because that's a great place where to add a little bit of personality in a very simple way, just by putting a shape in there, or like a star. It could be a heart or whatever you want. It could a flower, 4-leaf clover, whatever goes along with what you're writing. Now I'm kind of making the outside of that 4 a little bit more interesting with a wavy line. I just went around the whole outside of that 4 with one big wavy line. And now I'm coloring it in, so it's a darker black because I'm using a black marker. Actually, if I had planned this out in advance, which I really didn't do any planning for this video, I just opened up my sketchbook, turned on the camera, and started drawing a 4. But if I had really thought it through, I think it would have been nice to do that in blue instead, because blue is a fairly dark color. It shows up really well. So I would have preferred maybe, not necessarily, but it would have been a nice change of pace since I do usually draw in black. But anyways, it doesn't matter what color you use so much. If you do want your letters or your writing to be visible from a distance, you want to stay away from the lighter colors like yellow for the parts that you want to be seen. For things you may not want to be seen from a distance, like the 4 that I started with that I did draw in yellow, those light colors are perfect because they don't show up. So that's really the main secret of choosing the correct supplies. Oftentimes, one supply is not better or worse than another. It just depends on how it's used. So it's nice to know about whatever supplies you're using, like the markers and color in general, so that you can make the best choices for whatever situation you're in. So back to the 4, I'm still continuing to color in the wavy edges around this 4, and I noticed as I was coloring in this part of it, I started out with kind of big waves over there on the top left-hand side of the 4, and then I got a little bit smaller. As I said before, I didn't plan this out at all, so this is kind of like a big doodle, but hopefully it gives you some ideas. Another thing you may have noticed, and I'm doing it now, I didn't like the really sharp corners inside the 4, and so I'm smoothing them out now so they're nice and round. I tend to prefer more rounded edges, rounded things, than things with corners. So that's just a personal preference for me. Some people prefer more angles and corners and things. But anyways, now you can see I'm adding some stripes. So I'm really turning in this 4 into a stripes and stars kind of 4. So it's giving a bit more 4th of July flavor to this 4 without, writing the 4th of July. So it's just a kind of a fun way to add some personality to a 4, tell a little bit more of a story with just one letter or number, as you can see here. Again, I didn't plan this out. These are just wavy lines inside the 4. And after I drew those, I noticed that the star in the center kind of got lost a little bit, and I didn't want that to happen. I wanted the star to really stand out and the stripes to be sort of secondary, more in the background. So to fix that, as you can see, I'm going around the outside of the star and I'm making those lines thicker and bolder. So again, the thicker and stronger and darker the lines, the more they'll stand out. So that's good to know so that you're sure you're emphasizing the right things. There were some smudges around the edge of the 4. That happens easily. I wasn't being very careful. I tend to get distracted when I draw a little bit differently when I'm recording. So I'm not as careful about where I put my hand, and that can create smudges. So I'm covering it up now with like some little, I call them sparkly marks. You can call them whatever you want, just little lines. I added some dots, so it's kind of like confetti. It makes it a little bit more festive and playful. Again, the main part of what I was focused on for this 4 was inside of the 4 with the stars and the stripes, but it's also kind of fun when you can add just a little bit outside of the 4 too. So when you're thinking about letters or numbers in block letters, like big titles and things like that, not your regular writing so much, you can think inside and outside of those numbers and letters, because it's all part of the design. It's all part of the space. It's all part of what we look at visually. So just something else for you to be creative with and play around with. So this is something a little different I haven't done in the other videos I've done with the letters. I'm adding some color so you can kind of see what happens. I'm using Mr. Sketch markers. Those are the ones that they smell. So, I mean, in a good way. they're kind of fun. So I have the red one here. So I'm coloring in some of the stripes red, and the red Mr. Sketch marker smells like cherry. So they're kind of fun to use. They're meant to be smelly. They're in the kids section. They're a little bit harder to find than the Crayola markers, but Crayola markers work well too. Both Crayola and Mr. Sketch are water-based, so they're less likely to stain. The other thing is you need to be kind of careful because these do smudge. Water-based markers tend to smudge, which is why I was having some problems. But they're not as expensive as alcohol-based ones that generally don't smudge. So that's just kind of a side note on markers in general. And now I'm taking a blue Mr. Sketch marker and I'm coloring in some of the stripes in blue. So we have a kind of an American flag effect on this 4 to make it really patriotic and 4th of July friendly. And as I was doing that, I noticed that I wasn't very consistent on one of the stripes. So there's an extra white stripe at the top of the left side of the star, and then I didn't finish it on the bottom of the star, but it's okay. So I'm just going to keep coloring in. Just that's going to be a added bonus of a little white on the top that's not on the bottom. Sometimes that happens. That's especially if you're working live and you're doing this like in front of people as things are going on. It's very easy to lose your concentration, your focus, get distracted, and kind of make, I hesitate to call it a mistake, but things like that can kind of pop up that you weren't planning on. And you have to go with it. So this type of work, it's more, if you're doing it live, like visual notes, which is what I tend to do, then you want to think of it as, it's kind of like improv on paper. And you just go with whatever ends up there. So I wanted the star in the center. Again, I noticed it got lost a little bit more than I wanted it to. I wanted the star to really stand out in this 4, and so I went back and colored it in with yellow. As I mentioned before, these markers are water-based, which means they do smear, and I wasn't very careful here. I touched the yellow marker to the black around it, around the star, and that's why it smeared a little bit, as you could see on the marker when I held it up. So to avoid that, I wanted a little more yellow on the little sparkly marks outside of the 4, and so to avoid that smear, instead of coloring over the black, I just put the yellow marks next to the black. So that's one way around if you're using water-based markers and you don't want them to smear. That's one way around it, just being really careful about that. After I got done, I just didn't like the white stripes. They just stood out too much, and I didn't seem to blend in the way I wanted them to. So I went back with some stripes, some very close together, small, thin red stripes, and kind of filled that in a little bit. So they're a little bit lighter, as you can see, but they don't stand out quite so much because I wanted that star to really, really stand out. So by putting the red over those whites, so it's not solid white, there creates less contrast than the bright white next to the yellow, which is why that yellow star stands out, because now there's a lot more contrast between the yellow star and the red, white, well, actually just the red and the blue, and the stripes behind it. So that was a little bit longer video than usual, but hopefully it gave you some fun ideas and some inspiration for how you can create some block letters or numbers, or just have create something a little bit more festive and fun.